Rick and Morty finally released an epic story episode for its 7th season, involving not just the return of Rick Prime as we've been building up to for a while, but the return of evil Morty as well. We're going to explain the real reason that he returned, as well as the stellar ending to the episode that, in my opinion, really makes the show feel like Rick and Morty again after the awkward transition to these new voice actors. My name is Deepcut, and hit that subscribe button because if you don't, you know I might cry. It's been a very hard day. Also, spoilers ahead. The episode opened with what looked like a classic Rick and Morty adventure, one with Morty upset about how he got treated and what he had to do, and Rick telling him to get over it and quit if he really wants to. This conversation feels like something our Rick and Morty have been having more often as they've returned to their relationship and the Prime Rick story has unfolded. However, we quickly learn that this is actually a flashback of evil Morty, famous for kidnapping our Rick all the way back in Season 1. We have a quick recap of his adventures since then with a little additional detail, particularly in his origin, though it wasn't that dramatic. He finally reached his limit with his Rick and decided to turn him to a tool to do his bidding, leading to the events of the show as we know it. Last we saw evil Morty, he was finally escaping the central finite curve, which our Rick had created to isolate the dimensions with a Rick serving as the ultimate intelligence so that they won't ever have to deal with interdimensional traveling geniuses who are not Ricks. Out of the central finite curve, evil Morty finds a lot of these interdimensional travelers, who seem to portal in and murder their other versions of themselves accidentally. Evil Morty has made a private paradise out here powered by random interdimensional crystals, but finds himself being harassed by our Rick's technology, which is being used to consolidate different versions of the Prime Rick and messing with the dimensional structure in the process. Evil Morty shows up to tell Rick to stop messing with the multiverse, and to try and get Rick's job done, he kills a suspicious Prime Rick duplicate that ends up sucking them into a special prison with other Ricks. Now, we saw that our Rick was trying to make portal travel, but wanted to quit after getting a visit from Prime Rick, who made our Rick examine what he was doing and why, and chose not to pursue science in a way that someone as vain as Prime Rick seemed to, with Prime Rick wanting to abandon his own family and caring more about meeting other Ricks, it seems. The Ricks in this prison were like our Rick, random Ricks who decided not to create portal travel after meeting Prime Rick, so he sabotaged their families by killing their Beths and Dianes. Like our Rick, these Ricks went on a revenge mission, but they don't have our Rick's plot armor, and of course, don't end up surviving the Hunger Games style face down between our Rick and the other Ricks who just want to avenge their Dianes. This led to the revelation that Prime Rick didn't just kill these Dianes, but eventually made a machine that was able to kill Diane in every dimension, and which can be used again to kill every version of a character from every dimension just like he did with Diane. Prime Rick says he had to use it on Diane because of the other Ricks, seemingly as a punishment for continuing to chase him, even though they did have other Dianes in other dimensions that they could go to and probably did seek comfort with. With goo from the prison for some reason, Rick is able to find the original Prime Rick finally and races off to go kill him, with the Mortys following behind against his will using their portal gun. Now, the reason evil Morty came back to our Rick initially was because this machine could disrupt his paradise even outside of the central finite curve. And honestly, I'm surprised he didn't get sent to his original dimension when Rick reset the portal network and everyone was sent home. At this point, however, he is aware of the Diane killing machine that can kill that version of you across every dimension, and knows that he is at risk as a Morty with a Rick operating that machine, particularly this Prime Rick who never even seemed to meet his Morty before. Of course, it's not as simple as wanting this destroyed, however, and even after beating Prime Rick and being able to destroy the machine and kill him, evil Morty instead chooses to get the schematics for himself. He gets them and, interestingly, revives our Rick and lets him have his way with Prime Rick, but leaves him with the threat that he can use this new machine on a random Rick, and our Rick and all Ricks would cease to exist. Now, at this point, like many of the event episodes that involve evil Morty or other Ricks, this episode felt a little lacking. This was not at all helped by the awkward transition to the replacement actors for Rick and Morty, which becomes more and more noticeable as things simply don't feel like they roll off the tongue the way they used to with each additional episode. A lot of moments that felt like they could land simply didn't because the voices felt similar yet not right, and this was especially noticeable in Morty and evil Morty. I also really didn't like just how smart evil Morty is, or rather, how educated. My interpretation of him was that he was smart enough, like our Morty is, to use the tech his grandfather has against him, and from there, evil Morty would almost always have a Rick slave who can do the science parts for him. What I enjoyed about Evil Morty was that he felt like someone who was simply smart without the books, someone who knew how the world worked, not how science worked, but was able to use the tools made available to him by Rick to exploit them all in great ways as we saw throughout the series. And it felt awkward to have him just outsmart Rick at every step of the way so casually after how intense their last encounters were. Even trying to work past these things, however, this episode felt like one of the event episodes that gives very little overall in its early part, despite seeming like it's delivering. But of course, that is often the point. Some of these episodes really are stellar from start to finish, but others set themselves up to be ridiculous on purpose, to have a little fun with the audience for taking that element of the show so seriously, something the show is constantly joking about. But TV as a whole is contextual and about taste, and that's something I try to emphasize in a lot of my videos. I don't aim to criticize too much, and when I do, it is often for the same reason I'm doing here, which is to eventually talk about what I absolutely loved. After being revived from the dead, our Rick got his revenge on Prime Rick and absolutely destroyed him in a moment that was a lot more hollow than the other action sequences so far, which were cheesy and cinematic. Prime Rick noted that our Rick was the only other one he saw seemingly inventing portal travel on his own, and he sees our Rick as a sort of cosmic twin of his. In this moment, he talks about how he shaped our Rick, made him everything he is today because he decided to irrevocably change our Rick's life when all he wanted to get was ice cream with his wife and daughter, and to one day maybe appreciate the grandchildren that he might have as well. Our Rick ended up on a never-ending quest to kill Rick Prime, and to do that, our Rick had to take over the entire existence of Rick Prime, moving in with his family when our Rick no longer had one of his own. This allowed him to monitor for Prime Rick's return, but it quickly became obvious that Prime Rick never wanted to return to his Beth or meet his Morty the way the other Ricks did. Prime Rick probably killed all the Dianes not just to punish the Ricks already coming after him, but rather that was just his justification for wanting to release all of the Ricks in the multiverse from their marriages and give them a reason to run off into space and do more adventures with him. Our Rick really beats into Rick Prime as he taunts him about how our Rick is just a shadow of the Prime Rick, something entirely reactionary to Prime Rick and that only exists to fill out the space that surrounds Prime Rick. And while our Rick says that without Prime Rick, he'll be able to finally see who he really is, something about this isn't quite right. He returns to his life and has the devastating little sadness that reshapes the episode. All those moments are now funny gags, ruining any attempt to have a fun adventure episode so that we can feel the same punches that Rick and Prime Rick feel in the big finale, and walk away feeling just as hollow. We got what we wanted. Rick defeated Rick Prime, there was awesome cool battles, and a lot of new lore, and now all that's left is to see if the show will feel off. Feel hollow, feel not exactly right the way that life now doesn't feel right for Rick. The way it already seems to be for many fans with the changes to the voice actors and the different approaches to story in the series over the years. Of course, this isn't the actual end to overarching Rick and Morty stories, as Evil Morty did make it out with the Death Machine as discussed earlier. This is something Evil Morty could use now, but claims this would just lead to Summers being out for revenge on him, even though he could handle this as well with little guilt, I imagine. Instead, this just leaves the door open for another adventure, something Evil Morty might be starting to miss, and something that he might instigate if he finds himself perhaps just being bored out there in the multiverse. But what do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you next time.